This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to another episode of the Less is More Sports podcast. Matt, I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to this episode. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
We're going to look stupid and everyone's going to have fun with us, and that's what matters.
Ironically enough, as we're trying to get people to watch the podcast, Matt and I are going to give you 5 reasons apiece why you shouldn't watch the podcast. But anyways, this was inspired because it has come to my attention that as a podcast host and as a human being, people think that I have a very hard time admitting that I'm wrong. Well, you know what? Here's proof to prove you guys wrong. So without further ado,
I'm not saying anything. I'm staying out of that.
You don't have to. And Matt, I like your hat in the background, but without further ado, we are going to get into it. So Matt and I are going to go one at a time, starting from the bottom up, and give our 5 worst predictions we've made in sports. So let's get right into it. With my number 5. Now, this one's a lot lower on my list because it wasn't actually my prediction itself. So those who watch the podcast know that I am not a fan of Trae Young at all. And my original statement about Trae Young is that I wouldn't build a team around him. I don't like his mentality. That's just my opinion. But for whatever reason, people have a hard time realizing that that was my original point about Trae Young. So with a group of my friends in a group chat, one of my friends bet me that within a 3-year period, Trae Young would lead the Hawks to the playoffs. Me not thinking, really not being the point I was trying to make, I was like, you know what, why not? So the first year, I'm looking pretty good. The second year, he leads them to the Eastern Conference Finals. So it's not so much that my prediction itself was wrong, but it was a bet that I took that cost me $100.
Oh so my God, Les.
So for that reason, betting against one of my friends. No, here's you know what the funniest part about this is?
Oh my God. You know what is it? I'm genuinely curious to know.
The funniest part is the individual who he knows who he is that was most excited about me having to pay the $100 was not the person I bet with.
Why? Who hates you?
A lot of people, Matt. I am not a very likable person, apparently.
Who hated you?
He knows who he is. He knows exactly who he is.
We're even saying this like, you know who you are.
Yeah, you know who you are. Yeah, it's kind of like we've done many times on this podcast. They know who they are. But yes, so because by default that Trae Young cost me $100, he has to make this list somehow, some way. Even though that wasn't my take, it cost me $100. So it might as well have made me look bad enough.
Yeah. I mean, if it costs you money, it's got to make the list. So it's very appropriate. So it's funny that we talk about the NBA drafts because that's where I'm going to start my list unless we're going to go back to the magical year of 2008.
I already know where this is going.
Yeah, I bet you do. I thought the next great NBA rivalry was going to be OJ Mayo and Michael Beasley. I thought those guys would be Hall of Famers by now, and we would be having discussions about who was better and all that stuff. And I think one's playing in Ice Cube's league, and the other one, well, he may be playing in the basketball tournament. I don't even know anymore, but Les, I don't know I don't know how I got it so wrong, but like literally, the entire 2008 draft was just like an extremely bad time for me. I thought Derrick Rose was going to flop because he choked in the national championship game. I thought that Russell Westbrook and Kevin Love were overrated. And I was riding the Joe Alexander train. I was riding the Michael Beasley train. I was riding the Jared Bayless and OJ Mayo train. I thought those guys were going to be the good ones because I had convinced myself that the Big 12 conference was the toughest conference in basketball, and that those guys were going to be ready for the NBA, and they fit the new league, and Miami was going to have a superstar, and they wouldn't even need LeBron James. Dwayne Wade found his new superstar, and that wasn't accurate at all. That wasn't accurate at all. I didn't even know who Danilo Gallinari was. He's still in the league. The only one I think who I actually got right with being a long-term league success was Eric Gordon. That's just because I was an IU homer. But I remember I was really thinking that DJ Augustin, Jared Bayless, all those Joe Alexander, all those Big 12 guys, Michael Beasley, were going to be just world beaters when they got to the league because they played in the toughest conference in basketball and they were ready to go. And I don't think any of those guys are even in the league anymore. So that was a bad night for me. That was a very bad night for me. But at least Michael Beasley, in retrospect, makes sense. The guy was a talent. I had never seen such like focus and on the basketball court. He beat Kansas that year, and then it all just fell apart. And I don't even know why I love Joe Alexander so much. I just remember I really liked Joe Alexander.
I was gonna
And
say, I
so
think the Alexander one is the one that really stands out because I thought about putting Beasley on my list as well, but in hindsight, there was a lot to like about Beasley, and I think everyone liked Beasley. I think
yeah,
because one of the big reasons why he didn't pan out wasn't from a skill standpoint, or it was an off the field issue, from my
yeah.
understanding. And we all know, I think we all it doesn't need to be repeated on the podcast anymore. I think everybody knows.
No, it's
But
a
Beasley, there was a lot to like about him. I mean, when you break Kevin Durant's freshman scoring record in the Big 12, they are doing something right. He was a 26-12 guy a night. Not to mention he was 6'8", even though we thought he was 6'10" at one point, but even still 6'8", could handle at the top of the key, shoot anywhere on the court, good athlete, good rebounder. Dude could do it all. So there was a lot to like about Beasley. And we had no way to predict that there was off the field issues that he had unless we were around him, which we were not. So, but
no.
the Joe Alexander one, I don't know. That might save that pick though.
Ugh. I don't know why. I was just like, he's a 6'8" forward too. He's got good stature. West Virginia plays tough defense. The NBA look is a tough league. Not knowing how positionless basketball was going to destroy everything in 3 years from then. And I would like to point out that Joe Alexander has won 3 Israeli Cup championships and did play in the basketball tournament, which is a really fun tournament. So there we go. At least I was right. He was a success.
The recording started.
Yeah, you can actually make like a really good living in the European leagues because I mean one of my good friends, AJ Slaughter, is actually made a very successful career overseas. So, but yeah,
Huh. It's funny that we both know people who know AJ Slaughter.
yeah. Well, I met AJ Slaughter during my time with the Sentinel News. Absolutely great human being. So shout out to AJ Slaughter. They actually just had a little event called the 4 vs 40, where him and Jeremy Evans got together and got people from their respected high schools to compete in a game. And the highlights are on YouTube. Taylor Grayson, shout out to you for putting them on YouTube. It was a very good game. So I definitely recommend watching it.
One of the former athletic directors I worked with in high school was a big Western Kentucky guy, so he had met him and they were pretty close friends.
Yeah,
It's a small world, Les.
It is a small world. AJ's a great guy. Shout out to AJ.
Yes.
Is it time to move on to the next pick?
Yes, hit me with your number 4.
So with my number 4, I'm going to keep a similar trend going to my number 5, and what I mean by that is I'm talking about predictions that cost me money. So sticking with the 2008 season, everyone remembers before Tim Tebow was on College Game Day looking absolutely oblivious, talking about why recruits play college football, or why so many people love college football because of that's where your father went, that's where your grandpa went, and people don't want these recruits to get money, blah blah blah. I don't know. I mean, just looking completely out of touch, saying, "Oh, my jersey was up there with Kobe and LeBron's, and I wasn't getting compensated, and I didn't want to." Okay, you're full of you know what, but okay. Anyways, but taking it back to his time at Florida, they had a matchup with Oklahoma in the 2009 national championship game.
Oh yeah, good game.
Yes, even though Texas should have been there, because you remember that was that weird year where Texas beats Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. Texas loses to Texas Tech. I still hate Michael Crabtree to this day for that. And then Oklahoma dismantles Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship. So by default, Oklahoma went to the nod. We got the nod and got to go to the national championship game. Oklahoma was also very hot. I mean, Sam Bradford was leading the way, and I thought, you know what? This is before at the time I realized how overrated the Big 12 was, and I was like, you know what? I think Oklahoma is going to beat Florida in the championship game. I just unfortunately happened to say that in front of a Florida fan that I went to St. X with, and he thought I was absolutely crazy, and then on the spot said, "I'll bet you $50." And I was like, you know what? I'm pretty confident, so sure. Here's the key. I know what a lot of people are thinking right now. Well, okay, your last pick was $100. This pick was $50. The $100 looks a lot worse. Okay, here's the thing. The $50 came when I was a freshman in high school and I had no business throwing out $50 bets. At least
Wow.
the $100 one
Why are
came
you
as an
doing-
adult. I could afford to lose $100. I can't afford to just be throwing out $50 bets. So by default, betting, and that is the last time I will ever bet for Oklahoma at all, because we all know I hate Oklahoma, hook 'em horns. And you know what? The only time I ever cheered for them in my life, they cost me money. So that is all the reason for that. The fact that it is 5:08 Eastern time and OU still sucks.
Oh my God. We had to just bash Oklahoma for like the last 30 minutes of that. Or 30 seconds of that. We really did.
Yes.
All right, Les. Well, I don't know why 2008 is such a watershed year for being wrong about sports, but Les, we're gonna put in the Wayback Machine. I'm gonna tell you about a guy who who I was almost willing to bet $50 was going to win Defensive Player of the Year when he got his contract in the NFL. And that's Albert Hainsworth. That's another guy who I thought when he signed with Washington was just he finally got the money. He was out of the Colts division and it was time for him to go. And then we all know what happened there. Once again, another example of just off the field stuff getting in the way of a really good player who could have been so much more. But I was willing to bet that Albert Hainsworth was going to be the defensive player of the year going into the 2009 season. And then things just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it was just absolutely incredible. And I still don't know to this day how it didn't work, other than, like I said, off the field stuff getting in the way. But man, I was convinced that guy was going to be he was going to change that division. He was going to make Tony Romo and Donovan McNabb have nightmares and just go beast mode on them every chance he got. But we all know what happened there. He lasted 2 years. Then he ended up in Tampa Bay, New England, where he on minimum deals, and now he's just out of the league. And it's another one of those sad kind of stories where you're wrong, but still, I really, really believe to the fiber of my being after what he did to the Colts those 2 years, that Albert Hainsworth was going to be the greatest defensive tackle. That he was going to be on the All-Decade team. He was going to win Defensive Player of the Year. And then it just never happened. And that does suck, but you can't be right all the time.
It's funny though, because you're right. Because Albert Hainsworth, those years with Tennessee, was an absolute nightmare for the Colts. And at the time, it looked like that Washington was just getting an like you said, all-world player on his way to being one of the better defensive tackles in NFL history. And then all of a sudden, that magical thing that you and I don't know about, as in how they are off the field, comes into play yet again. And that's where I feel like, your first two picks, we had no way to know with Beasley and Hainsworth. We had no way to know what was going on off the field. So it's that it was very easy for us to get these predictions wrong, because everything we had seen up to that point, these guys were great players. And Hainsworth, I think, and rumor has it that Dan Snyder's still owing money for that Hainsworth sign.
I mean, they still owe Bobby Bonilla money. I mean, it's a national holiday now.
Oh, I know.
We got Bobby Bonilla Day to celebrate, man. I mean, that giving players exorbitant contracts is the American way, and I can't help that.
Yeah. So, anyways, we're moving on to our third.
Number three.
Number three. Now this pick for me, I've never been so glad to be wrong in my life. So we all remember taking it back to the summer of 2010. to where a certain individual's contract had just expired with the team that drafted him. And if you haven't picked up on who that is by now, it's LeBron James. And the big conversation is, where was he going to go? I think most could tell you that he wasn't going to go back to Cleveland. They had failed to really put a good roster around him. Despite all of his efforts to give Cleveland everything he had, it just wasn't enough. He needed to go somewhere that would actually put a good roster around him so that he could win a championship. At the time, because if you remember correctly, Jay-Z had just bought partial ownership of the Nets at that time. So for me, I thought it was a done deal, given LeBron and Jay-Z's relationship, that LeBron was going to go to the Nets. However, I remember I was in Gatlinburg with my family, and I got a text message from my stepdad saying that LeBron was taking his talents to South Beach, and me and my sister ran down the streets of Gatlinburg excited as can be. So I have never been so happy to be wrong because by being wrong, the Heat went to 4 straight NBA finals and won 2 of them. And the Nets continue to show why they are the ultimate fumbled the bag team in the NBA. But yes, at the time, given the current events of who bought partial ownership of the Nets and who he was friends with and his relationship with that person, I thought LeBron was for sure going to the Nets, but I'm glad he didn't.
I mean, that would have been one heck of an interesting thing that would have played out there. Because I mean, I don't think that Chris Bosh would have gone to the Nets either. So it would have been interesting to see who they paired with him. Maybe they trade for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to go play with him anyway. That team would be a movie. Just watching Paul Pierce yell at LeBron James. So for mine, I'm actually gonna combine here because we've been doing this for about a year now, and so we've had time for a couple championships to run through. So I'm going to be with all my preseason championship picks because our NBA preview show, I think you were with me on this. We were kind of on the Lakers Nets inevitability bandwagon, and we all had there. And I think even on our NFL prediction show, I picked a Browns and I want to say 49ers Super Bowl for some reason because I just really wanted Cleveland to have something nice. I really did. And there's no logic behind why I picked that at all, other than the fact I actually liked Baker Mayfield because everyone else hated him, and I liked Odell Beckham because everyone else hated him, and I just wanted to watch everyone's heads collectively melt as they had like the greatest pinnacle of success in Cleveland football history. But that's really the only reason why. It's because I was trying to be spiteful to everyone else. I should have known that Cleveland is Cleveland. And it doesn't matter how hard I try. Cleveland will still find a way to Cleveland it up unless LeBron James is there. The Nets pick and the Lakers pick, I'll forgive ourselves for that one because who wasn't thinking that? We were like, oh, healthy Kyrie, healthy KD. The Nets actually had decent depth. The Lakers had just won it. Russell Westbrook might be a nightmare, but if they don't like him, they'll trade him at midseason for picks, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Until it didn't.
And then nothing happened, and LeBron hates. Then the Lakers are a mess, and the Nets are a mess, and those teams are both going to be struggling to make the playoffs at all this year, to the point where we'll just probably pick the Warriors and Celtics again because the NBA is an unimaginative league where we pick narrative over actual basketball, especially when it comes to the preseason. So, but yeah, that's my pick. Our championship picks. I don't think we did a baseball preseason podcast because it already started up about the time I was on here. But preseason picks for NBA and NFL were not the greatest. And I remember we didn't even try to pick a champion for college basketball because that thing's such a cluster. You'd be lucky you could pick a team that makes it in, but you don't know who's going to win. So, yeah, that's mine. Cleveland, how could you? Nets and Lakers. We are victims of the narrative because that's what sports writers do. So that's my number 3 is every championship pick we've made on this show.
Which I like your third pick for the strict reason because a lot of what we do on this podcast is expose the narrative. But this particular instant, we fell into the narrative. So that's why I really like this pick. So moving on. So my number 2, and everyone predicts that some players will pan out, after they're drafted and some players won't. Well, I have two NFL stars who I predicted wouldn't pan out. And not only have they panned out, they're two of the best players at their position right now in the NFL. So I'm going to start it off with, oh, please, at least hear me out on this one. So my first one is Justin Herbert. A lot of you all know Justin Herbert is one of the better quarterbacks in the league right now. Definitely one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. And he's on a lot of people's radar to win the MVP this season. But it wasn't so much for me. It wasn't so much anything Herbert did or didn't do why I wasn't sold. Matt, honest question. Who was the last quarterback to come out of Oregon to do anything at all in the NFL?
Dan Fouts.
That's been a long time.
Well, I mean, Marcus Mariota, he's still there. He's not a superstar.
No,
now you're just being mean. Now you're just being mean.
He was the number 2 overall pick. No, he's now back. He's about to be a backup in Atlanta for Desmond Ridder. I'm calling it now. That might be a wrong pick for all we know.
So this could be on next year's bad prediction show.
Yeah, it'll be on next year's bad predictions. But no, Mariota has not panned out.
Comeback player of the year, thanks to Les.
I guess that's just how it works. Now that I say it, now that I'm on the wrong predictions podcast, it's gonna happen now. And then Marcus Mariota is gonna come at me and say, "Hey, less is more sports. This is why you're wrong."
I don't even know who you are, man. I just hate you.
I actually have another funny story about Marcus Mariota. When I was on the Weekend Sports Buzz, my host Kelly Patrick thought that he was Italian for whatever reason. So I had to be like, "Hey, whoa, no, he's from Hawaii." I had to call him out on air. But
oh no,
I guess Marcus Mariota just has a bad track record with me. But no, anyways. And during my time as a sports fan, because I wasn't alive when Dan Fouts was in the prime of his career with the Chargers, but Joey Harrington, Marcus Mariota, Dennis Dixon, Darren Thomas, none of them panned out. So I'm thinking I had developed my own narrative that I was not sold on Oregon quarterbacks, even though Justin Herbert had the size, the arm strength, everything you look for, even mobility that you look for in an NFL quarterback. It's just the simple fact that he went to Oregon. Why I was not sold. So that's the first player. And the second player, and this is the one that makes it really bad, because it's not that I predicted he wouldn't pan out, but how aggressive I was with this take. And the player I'm talking about is none other than Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans. So I went as far as to say that I feel sorry for whoever drafts Derrick Henry, and that I am quoted by saying it is a waste of a pick.
Whoa.
That's why, that's why I said Herbert first and Henry second. So if anything, that was a waste of a take, because Henry has been anything but a waste of a pick. We're talking about a dude who is constantly in the conversation for leading the NFL in rushing. One of the best pure runners in the league right now. And when healthy is like a walking 2,000-yard season.
And antagonizer of the Indianapolis Colts, of course, because
of course, yes, that's how it would work out.
Why not?
Yes. As my number 3 was a wrong prediction that worked out in my favor. My number 2 is one that did not work out in my favor. So that's just how the sports god have blessed me this time go around. But anyways, yes, Derrick Henry. The reason I say that, and for those watching, yes, I had watched him in high school. Those insane numbers that he put up, we've all seen. He was putting up just Madden rookie mode video game numbers in high school. Then he goes up to Alabama, and of course wins the Heisman. McCaffrey should have won, but that's beside the point. Then goes on to have a great career for the Crimson Tide. But the things that I saw at Henry that I wasn't sold on in high school, I just thought, okay, he's just bigger than everybody. You're not going to get away with that at the next level, at the next. And then he goes to Alabama, and the running lanes that he was running through, my grandma could run through those. So every time that I saw him have to cut or make a running back move, I saw he didn't have success. And I was like, okay, he's not going to have those running lanes in the NFL. Will he? I guess. I don't know. But So anytime I felt like too many times he was going to have to be able to cut on a dime or make a running back move or have to use his vision, and it wasn't going to work out. But you know what?
Right.
He proved me wrong, and now I'm I'm the one looking stupid. So
But I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is like it's the same thing that you never take that nobody ever believes in an Alabama quarterback.
mhm.
It's but with both. I mean, you look at the positions. Oregon's quarterbacks always look good. They play in the Pac-12. It's a high-powered offense. You don't get to see a lot of them, unless they make the Rose Bowl, struggling against like a very good defense. And with the Alabama running backs, before that it was Mark Ingram, who was good, not great. Eddie Lacy, good, not great. Bo Scarborough, good, not great. There were a lot of good, not great Alabama running backs, and a lot of great in college, horrible, horrendous, crying and screaming in the professional Oregon quarterbacks. So I mean that does make sense. That does make a lot of sense why you would think that, especially. And I know you stay up later than me, so it really doesn't matter if you hadn't seen Justin Herbert play, because Oregon's playing Washington State at 10 o'clock on a Saturday. You're already imbibing. You're already tired. You've had a good day. You're already probably passed out of it anyway. You don't know what he's doing out there. So those picks make total sense, unlike this one, which was my number two, the boldest prediction I think I've ever made. Well, no, not really. One of the dumbest predictions I've ever made, at least for sure, which is that, oh boy, I actually thought that the Pacers were going to win the 2013 NBA championship and Roy Hibbert was going to win Defensive Player of the Year. And we all know what happened to poor Roy Hibbert. That was the great. Oh, why are you clapping, you Heat homer?
Exactly. You know exactly why.
You can't even pick.
Birdman,
seven-
Birdman.
Oh gosh. Hey, we did get the Lance Stevenson thing from that though, which is what really matters. It was the GIF that saved humanity.
The
But
one
yeah,
where
I
he's
really
blowing in LeBron's ear.
Yes, it's perfect. You can't argue that that's like the most perfect image of NBA basketball ever conceived. But no, I really thought that the Pacers, they had done enough. They got some shooters, and that Roy Hibbert was gonna come into his own and become the next Shaquille O'Neal, or at least Dwight Howard. Because I was wanted to believe they were a good team the year before. Paul George was still young. It was hard not to love George Hill. He was the local guy. David West was just a mountain of a guy who was the leader. And then you just had Roy Hibbert, the young up and coming defensive stud. And then everything just fell apart, even though they drugged the Heat to 7 games, and Roy Hibbert just didn't exist anymore. And I didn't know what to do with this because I really thought the Pacers had done enough, because I thought, like, with Miami approaching the end, you know what I'm saying? They were approaching the end. There was uncertainty, even though it wasn't going to be ego that drifted them apart because they were all friends, but maybe a little bit of uncertainty, maybe a little bit of unsureness that drove them apart. And the Pacers were going to take advantage of that, and they were probably going to win in 7 games because they were going to secure the 1 seed, because Miami never did the regular season with their heart in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Resting players isn't a new trend, in spite of the fact people want to act like it. And I was just convinced that Roy Hibbert was going to be the Defensive Player of the Year for the next 3 years. And the Pacers were going to win the East, and they were probably going to play the Spurs and beat them in an old ABA matchup, and then everything fell apart.
It's there was a lot to like about those Pacer teams, even in hindsight, especially coming from the quote unquote Heat homer of this podcast. Paul George was an up and coming superstar, and then is still a very, very good player, but in a lot of ways, never really got to what we thought he could be after that injury for USA Basketball.
Yep.
Roy Hibbert is the perfect example of how much more perimeter oriented the NBA became, and you can't just be a statue in the middle anymore. But, for time constraints, I can definitely see why you say that, because we have less than 10 minutes left. We are at currently 8.5 minutes. So I'm going to go to my number one, and this is the very first one. And Matt, we talked about this pre-podcast. This is the first prediction of my 5 that I actually made on this show.
Oh.
And this is actually before you became a co-host. So, but shout out to Clucas and Mari, because they were on the show for this one. And that is, are you ready, Matt?
I am. I can handle this, I promise.
I predicted the 2020 Texas Longhorn football team would go undefeated and make the college football playoff. Here's why.
We're done.
Bye. See you next week. Wait, did he really leave?
Gotcha.
But anyways, no. So in 2019, the Longhorns were plagued by injuries. And then when fully healthy, they looked really good. They even went toe-to-toe with the eventual national champs, the LSU Tigers, who, if I don't say so myself, were the best team in college football history. But that's a topic for another day.
That is not a bad prediction.
That is not a bad prediction. No. But as for my bad prediction, they went 7-3. And the issues that I thought would be gone with a healthy roster were still there. If there was any good that came out of this, though, it led to Tom Herman's firing, and hopefully is not a bad prediction, led to the Steve Sarkisian era, which I have every reason to believe is going to end very well, because I love everything that's happening right now. And I'm hoping that that is not another one of these next year bad predictions. But yes, my worst prediction is that I predicted the 2020 Texas Longhorn football team to go undefeated.
Oh man, I have made some bad predictions in the past, but this one may be the most tragic, and I don't know if the word dumbest, but most homerish pick I have ever made in my entire career. And that was back. You remember back when I was at IUS doing their radio station? I did a sports show there with a couple of friends, mostly Sam. And I still remember on the air how I said, like, on one of the very first shows, and I still remember saying this, and I hate the fact it never came true because it's going to break your heart when I say it too. I actually predicted that Andrew Luck would win more MVPs than Peyton Manning, and he would actually end up with more Super Bowls. And that didn't happen all of mine are tragic, and I admit that because I don't make like fun bets or anything. I just take like weird takes, and I mean, they usually end up very sad. So, but yeah, I was really convinced that because of his mobility of all things and the fact the Colts were spending money to bring in guys like Trent Richardson, who looked a lot better in the preseason than he did in the regular season, not to mention all the money they were throwing at guys to play receiver.
Before you continue, that's a guy that definitely benefited from those Alabama running lanes, but continue.
Yeah, I forgot about him. Yes, I forgot he went to Bama. And Les, I really thought that the way they were spending money and the way, even though it wasn't on the offensive line, I was convinced that doesn't matter because he'll be throwing it to with such ease to such great players that they're trying to acquire that it doesn't matter. And then, of course, the offensive line was the most important thing they could have invested in instead of George Odom or one of the many, or DeQuell Jackson or one of the many defensive guys they got to help him maintain a lead. And then, of course, and this was fresh after the comeback in Kansas City. I don't have to explain what that was to anybody, but tragically, I really thought Andrew Luck was going to win 5 MVPs and win 3 Super Bowls. And I even was honest. I said it may.
Peyton has 5 MVPs.
Oh, Peyton has 5 MVPs. I mean, it wasn't MVPs. I said he was going to win at least. I said it was going to be at least 5 and 3 Super Bowls.
That would be still a more successful career, in hindsight.
And I even admitted that I didn't know if he'd win them all in Indianapolis. He may go to, and I said, stupidly, I said for some reason San Francisco because of his connections to Stanford and things like that. I thought maybe go back to the 49ers, but alas, that never happened, and the whole retirement thing happened, and that's why Colts fans don't get nice things anymore is because of the way they treated Andrew Luck when he announced he was retiring. But
yeah.
That's got to be my biggest one because it's the one that makes me the saddest in hindsight. It's just thinking about how good Andrew Luck really was and how it was just squandered and how just because you buy a Cadillac, you've got to make sure the motor is working before you take it out for a drive. So that's my number one of a list of very tragic things, most of which involve Midwestern sports teams falling flat on their face because why not? Why not?
It's funny though, because like most of my picks, people are going to listen to this and be like, start laughing at me. Whereas like your picks are going to be like, oh, that's actually depressing.
Yes. My narratives are all sad.
Right. Yay, sad
Yeah.
narratives.
We join us next week for such happy topics as was the home run derby rigged?
It will be if Albert wins it, it's rigged.
Yes.
It's
If Albert Pujols
rigged.
wins. All right. Since we got a little bit of time, but we don't have a lot less, who do you really want to win that? Put your cardinalisms aside for a minute.
Okay, I was gonna
And
say, who do I want to win it, or who do I think's gonna win it?
you can say Pujols is your sentimental pick, but if you had to pick a guy slugging it right now to win, who would you pick?
Hold on, I gotta like just because I was so prepared to give this podcast, I gotta look up who all is in the home run
Oh,
derby.
that's fine. I'll go ahead and do mine, which is I think that it's going to be Soto. I think when you turn down that kind of money,
Now that was
You're
a
going-
right prediction you made.
yeah, that is one. I did get that one right. So I mean, I don't know how I did that, but he just turned down that 144 million or that ungodly sized deal. So I'm going to go with him. I feel like most people are going with Pete Alonso, but I can't support New York.
I
I
understand.
just can't. I don't. I just can't do it, man. So I'm gonna go with the kid who's been suffering long and hard all year, who's now might be going to get traded. But I'm gonna go with Juan Soto to defend his home run derby title. Les, I know you're going with Pujols in your heart, but who are you
Okay, my
going with
heart.
in your head?
Okay, so my heart is obviously Albert Pujols, but oh lordy, I gotta see.
I sprang this on him, people. He really wasn't. We really weren't planning this, so
Yeah, so I'm trying. I mean,
he's trying to think here.
why is it? I'm gonna go.
Drum
You know,
roll.
I was trying to find just anything to say to not say Pete Alonso, but I have to go Pete Alonso. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Les, you're
I gotta go
killing
Pete
me,
Alonso.
Paul.
I gotta go with the polar bear. I would have loved to seen Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is who should be in it. Yeah, he'd be my pick.
Yeah. Either way, a Yankee or a Met. No, I can't support this. I can't do this, man.
Either way,
Join us-
we are running out of time. So that is all the time we have for the Less is More Sports podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Be sure to tune in for our next episode, and I hope you continue to like and subscribe to this content. So without further ado, Matt and I are out.